Welcome to Radio Makua, a people-centered podcast. I am your host, Musa Wenkosi Abe. In this episode, we speak with an environmental lawyer from Natural Justice about the legal and constitutional issues that may arise around the development of green hydrogen in South Africa.
So I think for just in terms of really laying down what the risks are around green hydrogen projects is firstly, as we see them start rolling out in South Africa, what we see, and we just looked at Boegoebaai and Omelo, is one, your sort of risks or potential, we call them potential or reported violations. One is the lack of access to information, which causes confusion to people. People don't know what's going on, and by the time they find out, these projects have already been decided on. But beyond that risk is obviously for green hydrogen, you need a lot of wind and solar power. That takes up land. So therefore, lots of land is needed. And the problem with South Africa is it seems like communities' land is always the one that people go after first, whether it's for a mine, whether it's for development, a project.
This episode is part of a series on green hydrogen produced by the Mining Affected Communities United in Action and Women Affected by Mining United in Action, or Makua wa Mua. This is a social justice movement that has a stronghold and organizes communities affected by mining activities in South Africa. Makua wa Mua is part of a network of civil society organizations known as Green Hydrogen Watch. The network monitors and shares insights and experiences on the development of green hydrogen in South Africa, mainly to help communities engage meaningfully with green hydrogen development. Natural Justice that we speak to is part of this network. Green hydrogen has been earmarked as a significant driver of the transition to a net zero energy system and an important contributor to decarbonization. South Africa wants to position itself as a major player in the production of green hydrogen. Through its commercialization strategy, we learn that South Africa sees its natural endowments like land, wind, solar, oceans, and its established petrochemical industry as important leverage in the production of green hydrogen. While all this is good and well, it is important to inquire, to what extent has the government been transparent with its people in investing in the large-scale production of green hydrogen? What are the risks, social and environmental impacts of green hydrogen production in South Africa? Has the government given sufficient consideration to human rights of host communities, or it has bypassed them in the rush to meet EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism? To answer some of these questions, I speak to an environmental lawyer from Natural Justice, Lauren Nell, who is also a legal coordinator for the Just Energy Transition Africa Initiative. Our conversation began with understanding the work of Natural Justice and the state of just transition in South Africa.
I'm Lauren Nell. I am the Natural Justice Just Energy Transition Africa Initiative Coordinator, or JETA for short, JETA. And the kind of work that we do within Natural Justice and the initiative, because it's two separate bodies, is within Natural Justice. We are lawyers that obviously fight for communities and Indigenous people's rights, and we strive to promote them across Africa, including protection of the environment, issues around climate change, and land issues. And then within the JETA initiative, it's about providing legal support to other civil society, community members, government, to ensure that people understand what a just energy transition is. They also are able to have legal advice given to them about that just energy transition and the laws around it, as well as obviously being able to assist others doing submissions to policy or to laws across Africa.
And what will you say is the state of just energy transition at the moment in South Africa? Do you think the principle of justice is being committed to?
I think it's always a good place to start with a document that speaks about what just means in South Africa's context. And when we look for that document, we find the Just Transition Framework, which was released by the Presidential Climate Commission, which was set up by the president. And it speaks to the idea of justice, or the idea of a just transition. And what does a just transition mean? So those ideals are based off of three principles: restorative, distributive, and I always forget the last word is reiterative, I think. But basically it's about one, sort of who's paying the price for transitions. 2, how do we pay back people who have suffered past harms? And 3, how do we make sure that nobody's left behind? It's equal. the transition. Everyone will equally benefit from the movement that takes place. In South Africa, and I've spoken about that quite a lot to people, because you do try and obviously analyze whether we're having a just transition, not just an energy transition, because those are two separate things. You can move energy sources from fossil fuel to renewable energy without it being just. But a just transition entails no one's left behind. But in South Africa, I think there's a lot of hesitation for the transition to even happen. And I've seen that a lot from trade unions, because they are worried that people are going to be left behind, that mine workers are not mine workers. Coal power station workers are not going to have jobs. The coal miners who mine the coal are not going to have jobs. They're not going to be retrained. And that fear comes out of other processes that we've seen, like with the rehabilitation or the closure of mines in South Africa, where huge groups of mine workers have lost their jobs subsequently all at once, like areas of Blyvereidsig, Carletonville, even Krugersdorp area. And there is no job waiting on the other side for those mine workers. And so I think it's difficult to say whether the transition is just, because I personally haven't seen much just in it, but I think there is attempts to try and make sure that the transition is just. But I think there's so much wariness from communities and people on the ground, because any other transition we've seen in the past, there's notorious cases where it has not gone well, where it is not just, where people are definitely being left behind.
I think it is important to note that this is happening in the context of climate change, and we have experienced this more recently with floods and the changing weather. How do we balance the agency, one, for the need to move away from carbon-intensive production while maintaining, livelihoods and sustainable jobs? How do we strike the balance?
And I think that's a really great question. And I think striking the balance is simplistic in nature, just not followed. In South Africa and even across Africa, what we really need to see is that community members, Indigenous people, citizens of a country are able to participate and are brought into the conversation of energy planning. They are brought in from the beginning of when projects are even thought of. So like with the coal mines, if you're going to shut down a coal mine, everyone needs to be consulted. So the mine workers who bring the coal, the whole supply chain, the truck drivers who drive the trucks for the coal, the workers at the power station, but even the informal workers, the workers along the side of the road who are selling food potentially, the women who use that coal maybe, to burn fires. It's about the whole supply chain. It's not just this isolated group of people who now have to transit from one sort of source of fuel to another. So I think that's the one, is including people in the conversation and the planning, not just the project EIA, the environmental impact assessment. It's about bringing them in from the start about the plans and asking them what do you think will work. Communities and Indigenous people on the ground are extremely in touch with what will work and what won't. It's not like they don't know what's going on. They're very well aware. And I think that's one the annoyance that communities feel is, well, we just get told what's going to happen and then asked to comment on it, but it's already a done deal. Like the Just Energy Transition Partnership, it was basically a done deal when it was presented to South Africa. We got told 8.5 billion rand is going to be used for transition processes. So I think that's the fundamental, and that speaks to basically the constitutional right of access to information, which is in the Constitution. So it's extremely pivotal that this right is obviously embraced, supported, and respected.
Just picking up from that point about people being told about projects, one of the major industrial projects linked to the just energy transition, where most money has been invested, is green hydrogen development here in South Africa. Would you say that communities have been involved from the beginning? And what do you make of this development?
So with green hydrogen work, just on background, in 2023, we had one of the we attended as a sort of a loose collection. It's called the Green Hydrogen Watch. And it's a group of NGOs, it's a group of community members. We attended the the Green Hydrogen Summit for the first time. And that was the first time I had specifically gone to a summit of that nature around just the issue of green hydrogen. Green hydrogen also, it's first sort of where we first start seeing it is with the Just Energy Transition Partnership, where it's obviously, you're seeing that sort of figure coming out. I think it's in the investment plan. We see a huge amount of money being put towards green hydrogen. And when I say huge amount, I think it's basically like a quarter. And I'm sort of estimating here. But what we see is things like skills, for people on the ground being substantially less in how much investment's willing to be put there in the future, or how much is budgeted to be put there. And so that just energy transition investment plan, you see green hydrogen being raised. You see this Green Hydrogen Summit, which basically was a rally or advertisement for South Africa to have green hydrogen here. And I remember one of the statements, which I found very profoundly sad, was South Africa has so much land. That's why you should come do green hydrogen here. The only thing that's not said to that, just as a caveat, is we have so much land, but it's mostly communities' land. Apparently, it's going to be built on green hydrogen projects or near communities, and it's basically going to impact them the most, right? Because they obviously on the ground, and that land where they stay is more affordable. It's basically cheaper, I've heard, resources, but that's no right for then communities' rights to be impacted. But basically what I think I'm getting to is communities don't know about it until it's on their doorstep. And so these plans that are rolling out are inevitably civil society is just trying to play catch up with it because it's coming out and we're being told what the plan is about green hydrogen. So it's a Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. Then we see the green hydrogen commercialization strategy coming out. Then you also find out about that green hydrogen projects in law in South Africa are listed as SIPs. SIPs is strategic integrated projects. And basically there's a few of them that are listed in this sort of way. And what that does is streamline those projects so they can move for environmental authorizations faster. So public participation is basically shortened, and licenses for those projects are all applied for at once. So if you need a water use license, an air emissions license, and then let's say an EIA, those all three will come together at once with public participation concurrently running on all those different documents. This means that communities who generally have a difficulty replying to one license or environmental authorization process because they're extremely technical now have to somehow reply to like 6 at once. And the government is, through that SIPS projects, the government is basically helping them streamline their licensing for these projects. So I think all just to say that all adds up to a really bad situation where people aren't really informed and they're basically trying to get these projects out as quickly as possible. And that's what's happening. So communities are playing catch up. We with Green Hydrogen Watch are playing catch up, trying to gather information. What's going on here? What happened here? How is this happening? Who said this could happen? And we even wrote about it for COP28, about green hydrogen projects, not only in South Africa, but Namibia, where it's also being pushed, by the way. So it's playing catch up. And I think civil society and communities have started gathering up the information, started talking to each other. So we're in a better position now than we were last year. But it's frustrating that communities have to take the initiative to find out what's happening and why it's happening.
Building from the argument that you make, for an ordinary person, what will you say are the risks, social and environmental impacts of green hydrogen in South Africa? And do we have a regulatory framework that will deal with those risks?
So I think for just in terms of really laying down what the risks are around green hydrogen projects is firstly, as we see them start rolling out in South Africa, what we see, and we just looked at Boegoebaai and Omelo, is one, your sort of risks or potential, we call them potential or reported violations, is one is the lack of access to information, which causes confusion to people. People don't know what's going on, and by the time they find out, these projects have already been decided on. But beyond that risk is obviously for green hydrogen, you need a lot of wind and solar power. That takes up land. So therefore, lots of land is needed. And the problem with South Africa is it seems like communities' land is always the one that people go after first, whether it's for a mine, whether it's for development, a project. And like I said, I heard this rumor that, well, it's apparently cheaper, something to that effect. And Bucco Bay is renowned for land issues, land disputes, to the point that communities have gone to court to justify their land rights. And now it seems like their land rights are a threat again. So this isn't even the first time these communities have gone through this. This is now another round of another development coming in to do the exact same thing of taking away their land. So that's just now the beginning phases. And then when we look at its functioning, we need water. A lot of water is needed for green hydrogen. And the problem is the two things that have the one thing that's really strongly been looked at and that's why all these places are generally green hydrogen ports around the sea, is what we'll do desalination. So desalination is when you take salt water, you take out the salt, you make it just pure water, and then they're going to use that. And then what they do is, obviously they've got all the salt now, so they need to do something with it. So they dump it back into the ocean. And I was speaking to a scientist, interesting enough, about this. And I said to him, people are like, well, the sea is already salty, so what's the problem if you throw some more salt back in? And he said, when you create imbalance in any ecosystem, it's going to have an impact. So it is an imbalance to throw more salt back and not as much water back into the ocean or the seas again. So that is definitely going to have an impact on your marine life, your marine plants, the actual ocean itself. By the way, the throwback is called brine. And it's also got some chemicals in it, not just salt being thrown back in. So that's another impact. But we do have a lot of meetings about this with green hydrogen involved individuals. And we'll mention this and they will say, well, we're going to give some of that water to the community. So because there is water issues in the Northern Cape, there's drought issues. They don't have access to water. But fundamentally, I'm very confused at why a right that exists in our constitution of access to basic services like water, like electricity, is now being pushed onto private entities who are creating green hydrogen. You are entitled to those rights beyond how the government provides them, but it is the government's duty, the municipality's duty, to provide basic services, not Hive Ammonia, who is a private company creating green hydrogen in South Africa, not the producers anywhere. So I think people also need to understand that this is not a solution that you get provided the basic service you were entitled to already from a private company to sacrifice then things like your livelihood and your land. That can't work legally in our law. Then in addition to all of those risks, the whole supply chain of green hydrogen is problematic because it's not just this power, like solar and wind energy being produced, then there's a plant to produce it. It is then also the fact that all that green hydrogen, or most of it, is intended for export. And so they are going to build harbors. Therefore, they're going to transport it from the green hydrogen plant to the harbor, which they are also going to build. And that harbor is going to create more impact problems because it's going to take away, let's say, maybe someone's fishing areas. It's going to, obviously, the infrastructure to get from the plant to the harbor is going to destroy something in its wake, as per se. So there's a whole bunch of impacts along this process of supply chain. And then I think one thing is in South Africa, we are having a problem with not so much energy access. We have a problem with energy poverty. People have access to power but cannot afford it. But instead of us creating power for ourselves, we are creating it to create a byproduct called green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is not very economically sound for using for electricity. It's good for storing renewable energy power. So it is good to do that. It can store it. It's like a vector. It stores power inside of it. But the problem is how much power or energy you lose over storing it and turning it into green hydrogen. It is a lot more cost effective to make electricity through just solar and wind, producing it directly instead of the storage process. Because green hydrogen basically comes from H2O, which is water. And H2O then is put through something called an electrolyzer, which almost like shocks it until it turns into an H and an H2 and an O. And then the oxygen leaves, and then obviously the H2 stays, and that's what they're bottling. That's the energy that they're using. But it takes an immense amount of power to separate those molecules. And so it's been argued a lot, why aren't we bringing just in renewable energy and getting it to communities first and making sure our own needs are met in this country before we start making a byproduct like green hydrogen? I think there's other impacts, I'm very sure, but those I think are really the big ones about what's going on here.
Having outlined the impacts, would you say we have a sufficient regulatory framework to address these issues and impacts?
Our law is really great in South Africa. The problem is the implementation. And the problem is the access for communities to legal services. In South Africa, there are not many free legal services for communities. There is not many NGOs who are doing this type of work. So yes, there's laws that you can enforce around your land rights, around your cultural rights, around your spiritual rights, around your dignity. It's a really important one in terms of the Constitution, your right to dignity, your right to equality. The problem is getting to somewhere that you can actually enforce them, because it's almost like known that some of these communities can't enforce those rights. So it doesn't happen. But the EIA processes, environmental impact assessment processes, there is public participation during those. But as I said, with green hydrogen, they've streamlined the processes to make it even shorter for communities to get involved and to do these licenses all at once. And because there's so many projects going on. And by the way, it's not just green hydrogen that's going on at the moment, expansion in South Africa. We're seeing gas projects being sort of proposed everywhere. So communities, and gas is definitely a sort of a no-go zone for just energy transition. So communities are having to fight those battles if they care about the environment, obviously, and then they're having to fight green hydrogen things. And at the end of the day, if you really thought about it, if you had to fight between stopping, let's say, coal, oil, or gas, or stopping a green hydrogen project, you're probably going to use all your effort to stop these other projects that are going to impact you, because the impact's worse here than it is with this green hydrogen. But it's not that the green hydrogen project isn't impacting you. It's just you don't actually have the time, capacity, technicalities, the skill set to go and actually deal with that. So you're dealing with all the other things being pushed around you. So I think there is legal remedies if communities, have the time, the effort, and the fight to go and address this. Also, civil society, that's why I sort of Green Hydrogen Watch started, so that people could try and form solidarity between each other and try and support each other from community members and civil society, so we can hear what is going on and keep up with what's happening with green hydrogen. Obviously, some of the groups form with gas. They form with different fossil fuels, fighting fossil fuels. So I think if you're a community member who's worried, there's a lot of resources out there from the civil society sector. And it's about, informing someone that there's a violation going on. There's something that's not right that's happening to a community. Not that they may know up front, like I said, because this hasn't been very transparent what's going on here, but also to realize, and I think just to say as my final point on this, is that just because a project is labeled as green or clean does not mean the impact on you is justified. So no matter what that violation is, you need to bring it to someone's attention, because I feel like there's a narrative, well, if it's a solar farm, then it's okay if you, like, your land rights are somehow impacted. It's not okay. That doesn't change how the Constitution or the rights of someone on the ground work. That impact being felt of you losing your land is still you losing your land rights, or losing access to your land, or losing access to your livelihood. It doesn't change because of the type of project it is. It's still the same thing, and we need to fight it at the same levels, because a just energy transition means we need to have the just part. It needs to be fair. It needs to be in line with our Constitution, human rights, with people's dignity being obviously respected and promoted. It cannot change because we change our energy sources. And I understand that obviously climate change is an issue, but we need to have sort of as civil society and communities, a very strict test that the just part is going to happen with the energy transition, or the energy transition will happen and leave so many people behind.
No, thank you so much for that, and just my last question. And I don't know whether you share this view. It seems to me that the hesitancy, pushing this has to do in part, with this carbon border adjustment program that the European markets or the European Union has sort of implemented. So part of, this project is for private capital to decarbonize its production so that it's not impacted by this. So how big an influence is external markets in other, countries are having in South Africa's own strategy of green hydrogen? And what, just in summing up, perhaps in responding to the question, do you then see potentially litigation, similar to what we have seen with Shell and in other kinds of exploratory projects that the government has been pushing in the throats of ordinary people?
I mean, I think that's exactly what I was, inferring to when I spoke about the export market, because that's the only reason this market has started to boom as per se, and be encouraged and be done. I know that a lot of it comes from Germany to decarbonize. And so they are intending on using green hydrogen for things like obviously processing of steel, where generally gas or electricity would be used, because obviously green hydrogen is a gas, so it can be burned, just like gas can be burned. So natural gas can be burnt. And it's meant to replace a lot of that in big industry, like you said, more abroad. But interesting enough, I've also heard Japan is demanding it. So it's not even just European markets. We're seeing Asian markets demanding green hydrogen from Africa. But the biggest concern, I think, about the market itself that is being created from, let's say, Europe or Asia, the biggest concern is that they are putting African countries against each other to compete to get a lowest price of green hydrogen. So as I mentioned, South Africa is a part of this sort of economy that's being formed, or this demand that's trying to be met. But then you also have Namibia trying to meet the demand. But you also have a big country like Egypt trying to meet the demand, except they're closer to Europe and they actually have gone online with green hydrogen facilities, and they have some of the biggest ones being built. We also have then even foreign markets like Saudi Arabia is getting involved in green hydrogen market, and they have tons of capital to start those projects themselves. They don't have to bring in investment first. So it's definitely a competitive market that's being created on purpose for big business to decarbonize. But the problem is what happens when they're not creating that demand anymore, or there is no demand, and you have created or invested so much effort and time into a huge sort of production line of green hydrogen. And now, let's say a country like South Africa can't sell it because we don't have the amounts of green hydrogen they are looking at proposing to produce. We don't have enough places to put it that it's worthwhile, that, it works. Like I said, we have energy poverty issues. You can use solar and wind direct to cure that issue. So I think it's definitely being created from an offshore sort of place. And offshore does determine a lot of what's happening, even not just South Africa, across Africa. So it's a little bit of a complicated thing, but in terms of the Paris Climate Agreement that's asking us all to reduce our carbon emissions across the world, there are some countries known as developing countries, and there's some countries known as developed countries. Developed countries are places like America. America, a lot of European countries, those are developed countries. The reason they're considered developed is they historically have carbon emitted a lot. They historically have been doing carbon emissions for a very long time. Then you have developing countries, like African countries. By the way, China is also there, who's very high in carbon emissions. They're also there because they haven't been carbon emitting for a long period of time. So the difference between those countries is why you're hearing about things like carbon, obviously, adjustment in Europe, because they are all developed countries. They have stricter deadlines of when they need to decarbonize their markets and their industry. So what's happening is you're seeing them all trying to decarbonize developed countries, and they then are basically using developing countries to do that decarbonization, whether it's through carbon markets, which is basically buying points so you can obviously carbon emit more without having to pay the price, or doing things like green hydrogen and asking for us to produce it at a cheaper rate so it can be provided to them, so they can then produce products that they then sell back to us. In Africa, by the way. That's how these economies work. Or it's things like promoting, other sort of mechanisms across Africa. And that's why you're seeing a huge market like this, or demanding gas from us. When the Russian-Ukraine war started, Africa all of a sudden has this heightened demand for gas from us to Europe because they're now not getting as much gas from Ukraine or Russia. So when projects start and when sort of things are being pushed, I think we need to have a lot of circumspection as Africans, one is, and South Africans two, is about why and from who. Who is asking us for this and who will benefit from this? And I think at the end of the day, when I look at the green hydrogen markets, they have not shown yet in South Africa that they are willing to benefit communities that would pay off for South Africans. Because it's not just about giving them free water, which the municipality should be doing. It's not about just providing them with some free power. It's about giving them jobs, giving them a future, and building an industry in South Africa that is South African. It's owned by South Africans. It's driven by South Africans, not foreign entities coming in. So I think a case like Shell or, one of these cases against fossil fuels, I think some of them are more, it's possible that it will come up, but I don't think it'll be for the same reason. It's not going to be about damage to the environment. It's going to be about things like land rights. It's going to be about things like community beneficiation and what does that mean and how do we solidify that in South Africa? Because green hydrogen is definitely less harmful to the environment than projects, that Shell has taken on that obviously have been pursued, which is offshore gas, and looking for that exploration right. So I think it's just there will be litigation because South Africa is very strong on that front. Like I said, we've got really great laws, but it's not going to be for the exact same reasons.
That interview with environmental lawyer Lauren Nel brings us to the end of our episode. This podcast series, produced in partnership with Action Aid International, is available on our website at www.makua.org.za and wherever you get your podcast. Do follow Makua Wamua on social media for more content on the work they do. I am your host, Musa Wenkosikabe. Take care.